Thank you everyone for coming. I'm definitely excited to be here and honored to be asked to do this. I have a few notes, but it's just because there's certain things that I hope not to forget. And I'm very excited to do this. I enjoy talking about myself. I enjoy talking about my art. I'm a tiny bit nervous just because I want everyone to enjoy it as well. I wanted to mention, I imagine this is okay, but if I'll talk for a bit and then I want to leave time for question and answer period, because I'm hoping people will have questions. I'm guessing probably some might. But if anyone has a question as I'm speaking, feel free to ask. If it's something like a point of clarification or something you want to know while I'm talking, that's fine. Lisa has been very clear to, mention that it's casual and there might be people coming in and out, and I love that vibe, so that's great. I also left a little book for comments if anyone wants to leave their comments after, or their email address or anything for me. So I'll start off and just give you a bit of background on who I am and how I got into painting, and what I do, talk a little bit about what I do now, and then I'll get into the topic that I had outlined, which could kind of be a massive topic. I feel like we could have probably a semester-long class on creativity and the community, but
I'm in for that.
We'll keep it to new now for now.
We'll just keep inviting you back.
Oh, thank you. I ended up doing this talk today because I just got an email from Lisa asking me to do it, but it was I felt like it was lovely timing because I had just been to the BRC celebration last year with my friend Ellie. I think you told me about it, at the Isabel, and we went because we wanted to go and celebrate that milestone and see Sarah Harmer and other people we knew. And it was shortly after that, so I learned a lot more about the BRC Center at that, and all the different connections that I have with people that have been involved over the years. And then I got the email asking me to do the talk, and of course I was very honored to do so and agreed to immediately. And it was not until a couple of months later, I think, that I mentioned it to my mother, and Terry, who's sitting here, and she said that she had hung her art here. It must have been 15 years ago. At least 15 or 20 years ago, and possibly was the first artist to hang art in this room. Mm-hmm. So that also felt extremely fitting, of course. So anyway, that's the background of my connection with this. And I grew up here with my family, and I was always interested in art. I was just one of those kids who was doing it a lot at school and always into my art classes. But I didn't really feel like I was ever channeled in that direction. No guidance. I mean, of course, there were tests at those time, some whatever the tests were called, and I think it actually spat out that because I had some decent math marks and I was into art, that I should be a fashion designer. So funnily enough, down the road that did happen. But I think there was just a bit of an attitude like, you apply to university, that's the thing you do, you apply to the best ones, and you pick the best one that you get into. There were 3 applications on Ontario, and then McGill, and of course Dalhousie and other options. And so I ended up going to McGill and made that choice mostly on the city because I was going into general arts, but I feel like I didn't really consider art school as an option at that point. And when I got to McGill, which I loved it, I was actually in commerce, which I found myself immediately very ill-fitted to that. Everyone else's classes were starting at 10 or 11, and I had 8 a.m. at the Bronfman building, and people were literally in suits with briefcases, and I'm in my hippie ripped jeans going. Anyway, I grappled with that for a few weeks and ended up transferring into general arts and ended up doing an English major. But while I was there, I was still very interested in visual art, and I ended up finding some classes that I could take that would fit that field for my electives. And I took an amazing year-long education course in the education department, which was drawing and painting. And it was just like a mini art school. We did life drawing, we were learning to stretch our own canvas, we had a great studio, we had 3-hour classes where it was studio classes. We would critique each other's work, and it was great, and it really was my introduction into painting on canvas and all sorts of things that I still think back to this day. So from then on, I did it as a hobby, and I did it when I was in school, and then when I was in my 4th year, my girlfriend and I, my roommate that I was living with, who's also from Kingston, we just started as a hobby sewing our own clothes. We had her mother's sewing machine in our apartment, and not a lot of money, and I guess some creativity, and just started buying fabric and literally making these sarong skirts in our spare time. And one day someone stopped me on the street and asked me where I got my skirt, and I told her I'd made it, and she said, "Oh, can you make me one?" And I'll never forget, I still have the skirt, but it was a bandana print little sarong, and I was on Prince Arthur, and she was a waitress at one of the restaurants there. And so I went home and I made her the skirt, and I sold it to her, and Aaron and I were like, the wheels started turning. Oh, that was pretty good. So lo and behold, we slowly went into that field, making our way, and we moved to Toronto after graduation. Our entire graduating class basically had moved back to Toronto, and our whole network, and everyone spoke, I speak French, but everyone spoke only English, really, most of the people that we knew, including my business partner. And so it just made a lot of sense to go to Toronto. So we set up shop there, and that's, long story short, we had a store for about almost 10 years, I think. And
Where?
we started out in Kensington Market, and we eventually got, we had contractors and sewers making our clothing in Toronto, and we were there for about 7 years, I think, and then moved down to Queen Street West. And in the end, we decided to close up shop. We had a wonderful run, but we were just kind of ready to move on to the next chapters in our lives, and really, because we were so attached to the business and the design, it was hard to, it wasn't the type of enterprise that was easy to sell, unfortunately. So we just kind of retired it, and we were both expecting children and stuff, so it really made sense at that point. And that's when I moved to Kingston, well, shortly thereafter. I had 2 children in, just like that, 2 children in Toronto. And then we moved to Kingston when they were quite young, back to Kingston. So now I've been here for 10 years, and right when we moved back, I started/continued pursuing my art a little more seriously, and juggling it with being a stay-at-home mom. And anyway, that's really the summary of how I got to where I am now, and it's been growing, and I've stuck to it, and I go in my studio day to day, and I get involved in a lot of other things. I've been doing some teaching and a lot of community work with the TET Center and United Way and Fair for Friends, and I've taught in some of the schools just on a very casual basis. So that is my background on what I do. Now the topics, as I said, I think they're pretty big, but what I tried to think about was what do I think that people want to know, and a lot of people are, people tend to ask the same types of questions, and that gets to the why and how did you paint that. So I think people wonder how artists get their inspiration and how they decide to paint what we do, and certainly then the how as well. So still life. So I have my paintings around the room, and as I think you can see, there are a few different styles. Not all of the work is mine, but I have some wind turbines and some still life floral pieces and some completely abstract pieces. So still life is what I started with first, and it came very naturally to me. This is something, I mean, of course, in grade school art or high school art or anything, and certainly when I was doing it in the university level, just arranging fruit or draping or anything, you know, you're trained to start out by looking at things, and I knew I had an aptitude for making something look like the object. So, but then it started to get more interesting when I think, well, it doesn't have to be just like here's a bottle and here's a reproduction of how the light reflects on the glass. It could be, I remember when I first started painting fruit and looking at a mango and just seeing so many different colors in there. Someone might say, oh, they're yellow, you know, just, but for me, I could look and say, if I'm gonna paint that, I see that there's red and there's blue and there's crazy colors in there, and it's so much more exciting to convey that, and if you walk away, it still looks like you still get that impression. So I've been exploring that idea with still life ever since. Also combined with the idea that I can take something small and I kind of see it blown up. So I'm not doing miniatures. If I'm doing something like this succulent, which actually was a very small plant, I've also done one that's 60 inches by 30 inches. It's just fairly challenging. But I enjoy doing that, magnifying and taking a small flower and really just taking the time to see it and then translate it. Abstract I started getting into just for fun. I think it started when I went to, a lot of you are probably familiar with the artist Heather Haynes, and I went to her studio, I think it was a girls' weekend, so we were just hanging out in her studio, and I started I wasn't going to try and do a painting like I would normally do. I wasn't sitting down to work. So I was just playing, everyone was just kind of playing with paint and textures and colors, and I just started thinking, well, maybe I could do an abstract and just really just be thinking about what comes next, and completely different process. And it was kind of as simple as that. It was a challenge, and it was something very different, and I just saw it as a compliment to what I had already been doing, the same way that I'm sure a lot of artists move on to the next thing. So I also found that was a medium that lent itself to working on a larger scale, which is really fun and exciting, and it's very different. It's more gestural and layering and just an entirely different process. It's not nearly as clear when a piece is done. So it's another thing that was just sort of incidental, but brought in a male clientele a little bit more, because I mean, it's stereotypical maybe to say that men weren't interested in the flowers, but there may be more of a barrier to talking about it and engaging. And I have a lot of male friends and father and brother, and you know, I did feel like that was a bit of a void for me, because I know that there were so many people that were really interested in art and wanting to be supportive, but it did kind of bring this new platform in a way, which was rewarding. And then something that happened that I thought was significant to mention. One thing I was going to say, just jumping back for 1 second, is I wanted to talk about not only why I have these three styles, but also why I've kept doing them simultaneously, because I haven't really moved. I've grappled with the fact that I haven't really moved from one style to the next, because I do think I feel like it can be confusing for people if I'm not doing what most artists do, that I have these three things on the go, and you know, down to how I format my website, and if I'm going to apply to a gallery, it's confusing if I present three developed bodies of work. You know, people want it to be one developed body, but I'm not that decisive. So that's the big reason why I'm stuck with it all. So what happened that I was going to say is that this painting over here, which unfortunately we can't see, all of us can't see right now, but there's a big abstract, and I submitted it, case in point, I submitted a few pieces for the juried art salon through the Kingston Arts Council a few years ago. I submitted one year, and I think I got a piece in the show, but that was that, and that was great, and I applied the next year, and you know, these things are just, I feel like it's a healthy exercise. It's work, but it gets me organized, it gets me to have my images, it really gets me to think about what pieces show best, and you know, sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't, and there's that, you know, dealing with those two avenues as well. So I think there was another year where I didn't get a piece in, and that was disappointing. I haven't applied to that many shows, so I kind of grappled with that. Submitted again, and I submitted one of each style, because for that I wasn't so much like, I just figured each submission is its own submission. That's how they set it up. You can submit 3 times. That piece was accepted, and I went to the reception, you know, where they handed out the prizes, and I got a prize, and I was really flabbergasted. It was I think it was the 3rd place prize. That's all it was called. But they have sponsors it was the Hughes Downey prize. They have sponsors for each of these prizes, and it really was an honor. But you know, I remember talking to my mother about this, and you were there. It really caused me to examine why exactly that was an honor and why it was validating. And something that I realized in preparing for this talk that stuck with me is that's part of why it kind of just does give me a bit of faith in the abstracts, because it's a really different market for them. And you know, there's a lot of this back and forth with thinking as an artist and trying to market your work, but I enjoy doing it. I know that's a given, but if I'm going to keep doing it, it's going to sustain itself, then I hope that some of the works sell. And it's not always necessarily, if they're large pieces, you know, it's for both space and budget, it's not the easiest thing to find clientele for. Anyway, I really, I felt that it was very interesting that the jurors saw something in that, and I did not know what they saw in it. But I'd really, you know, I'm tempted to see where any one of these styles takes me. So that's really why I think I've stuck with them all. And bottom line is that I do enjoy doing them all. I'm not finished with them. So on to the wind turbines, and this kind of happened like the jump with still life and abstracts and wind turbines happened in a fairly short period of time, because when I moved back here about 10 years ago, as I said, the wind turbines, the wind farm, as most of you probably know, had really just gone up around that time. And I just thought it dawned on me that it would be a great idea to paint them. And I was experimenting with abstract, and I think in addition to thinking it was this great idea to have, that no one was painting them yet, and I'd better get to it really quickly because I hadn't seen anyone else do it, and it's out there. I also really thought I'd had a vision of an abstracted landscape, with just the horizon line, and you know, rather than having trees or something on that horizon, it just kind of was the missing piece. It was this graphic element, and I just thought, I can do that. I've never been inspired to paint landscape, but it just made sense to me that this, you know, kind of 3-pronged, like perfect geometric thing could be the focal point. And so I started trying it out, and I don't have that formal training in, you know, landscape painting or anything, but I had that experimentation with abstract, and so this little one here, which, I mean, you can see it in the ones that are hanging as well, but you know, I really bring in sort of just that squiggly, like there's an underpainting, and then there's a sort of a scrawled layer of painting, and then the acrylic scraped over top, and all of that I kind of developed through working with abstracts. And I sometimes I leave it where I haven't done one part of the painting, the sky or the water or the land, I don't do the layer over top, and it has a different abstract look. Anyway, this is just a small example of, you know, sort of that technique and how I approached it. So I'm going to move on in a second to the creativity portion of the topic, but the segue for me is kind of one thing that people ask about is, you know, going to work every day, and if it's hard to go and sit in the studio or stand in the studio when you're not inspired, and really to me it is not. I think that inspiration for me strikes at very different times and not really all that often, to be honest. But then when I go into the studio and go to work, first of all, I'm very happy and thankful all the time that I do that, and that really keeps me going. I mean, that I can do this, and that I can get to work and play my music and be in really a pretty good place most of the time. And then I draw on that inspiration, so to speak. So that's when, you know, if I have an idea, well, then I'm going to start working on it. And I think a lot of artists really are like that. You know, when you read about artists, so many of them, I mean, I'm not terribly disciplined, but go into the studio every day, and I like to try and do things like a certain exercise, you know, sketching first or something, or certain rituals, but I really have not a lot of trouble getting to work. And I think if we all think that we do things when inspiration strikes, I mean, it's not realistic with the time, you know. I mean, I love sitting on the couch and reading, but I don't do it just when I feel like it, or I would be there all the time. And another thing I just wanted to touch on in the process for me is that there's a certain moment that sometimes happens with a painting, probably with a lot of other creative media as well, but anyone who paints might be familiar with it, where something does take over, and it certainly doesn't always happen, but it's so reaffirming to me to continue doing what I'm doing, because it's not a left brain thing. It really is. It's kind of just a trust, and that just what you're doing is going to turn out, and it's really being in the moment. And I do experience that, and you know, hopefully that sometimes translates in the outcome of what I do as well. Now, I do want to make sure to leave time for some questions. So it is a really big topic, the creativity, the portion of my topic that I said I would talk about, creativity and the role of the individual and in the community. And they're very interrelated. I've always had a drive to create, as you can probably guess from the stories I've already told, and I do feel like I have and continue to come to terms with it, because I question what I do. I'm not out there saving lives, and you know, I know that most people who value the arts really reassure me that that's okay. Of course, art is important, but it's important to remind myself and continue to get there, because you know, you can go to the other side of the cycle, as we all can. But I really think that for one thing, I trust that there's a purpose for it. So if I forget, I now, after, this is something that's lovely about having the experience of just doing it. I don't have the experience of school or anyone teaching me this, but you know, if I push through and have the faith that it's going to be good for something, then you know, it keeps me going, and I really do believe in it. And I think that art, I see through the connections that I make with people and that my art makes with people, that it touches us. And I think about, you know, I don't want to just say just doctors and nurses and people that are saving people's lives, but sometimes you can feel like there are other people's work that is more important or something, but I feel, and I think we can all have a little bit of despair sometimes looking around in the world, not only that art makes life more beautiful, but it really, it enriches our lives. So hopefully it may not extend our lives, but it makes our time here better. It makes the world a better place while we're all here. Enriches my life and the lives of others. So that's, I see it as very tied into that being the role of creativity in the community as well. Just those connections ultimately, and people engaging with art. And I have a story. This is where my story comes in, about these connections. I want my mom to be here for this story.
Where'd you go?
She's coming down the washroom.
Everybody stare at her.
I do have a little bit of a preamble to it. So this is something that happened just in the last few weeks. And it's just an anecdote. I mean, you'll see why it's significant. I participate in an art show every year in Toronto, and it's a group show. And there are about 20 artists. It's a fundraiser for, it's called the Taylor Staton Bursary Fund, and it's a fundraiser for, to send kids to camp. All sorts of camps. It's Taylor Staton started it, but kids go to all sorts of camps, in case you're wondering. And it's a really great art community effort. It's really laid back. We go into this great building. We hang the art the day of, we being the artists that are participating and a couple of coordinators. And then we have the show that night and the sale of the artwork. Some of the money goes to the artist and some goes to the charity. And my friend in Toronto who's been organizing it decided within I think last year's show, to put a catalog together ahead of time and to reach out to some of the clients and anyone really. He shares it online and people can view the artwork ahead of time, particularly if they can't make it to the event or they want to get a leg up on other people that are coming. It creates a little bit of hype. So he did really well in pre-sales last year and decided to do it again. And he reached out to the artists in August or September and asked people to submit their images if they had anything that was available and not, well, that was already painted because realistically everyone's painting up until the last minute. To the point where we have a big joke about whose paintings come in and they're still wet. And, oh, don't touch so-and-so's. So I submitted a couple of pieces, what I had at the time in September, and a lot of the works tend to be landscape. You know, it does have a real camping vibe, so I'm conscious to not have too many styles again, but the still life have done well at the show before, so I submitted some wind turbine images and some still life. And one of the ones I submitted was this one. So I don't have the piece anymore, spoiler alert. And so I sent this one. Sure. And a maple leaf, and so it's a painting this size. It's a 12 by 12, and I got an email from my friend Mouse, nickname's Mouse, who organized it, and he said, Ilex sold, and he said, yeah, someone's interested in buying the Ilex and wants to know what the name means. So I responded and said, it's the name of the flower, the berry. I didn't know either, but my florist friend told me, so that's what it is. And then I got an email a couple of days later. It was 10:30 at night, actually, I think, and it said, "Read this!" exclamation mark. So I was contemplating whether I would just tell the story or read it. It's quite lovely in her words, so I think I'm going to read it. And if I can't get through it, just because it's a bit emotional, I'm going to give it to Ellie to read. And it's lovely. It's just, and it's not that I mind crying, it's just I don't want to struggle through reading something right now. So she says, the client says, "Oh no, we've opened Pandora's box, the art of storytelling. Now I'm in big trouble, $, $. Stories for the artist. Why did I pop for the berries? In memory of my mom.
One sentence.
Okay. She adored these berries, and every fall she filled our home with them. The funny part is that she filled the car with them Thanksgiving weekend, and it drove my father crazy. Driving home from Georgian Bay, 45 minutes by boat, then car, with 5 kids in 6 years, plus food, cottage, friends, and pets. Of course, the damn berries spilled everywhere. She carefully stole away her quiet time, rare, and every Thanksgiving weekend between cooking turkey and closing up the cottage to hike into a swamp for those precious berries, whether or not often stormy. Only one flower meant more to her and to us. Sure enough, it was, and still is, forsythia.
Oh my gosh, I forgot an important part of the story. I'm so sorry. I messed up with the storytelling. So I get the email that she wants to buy the ilex, and I don't know why, but I replied to Mouse and I said, well, I guess she didn't like the leaf with it. I really like them paired together. I'm going to send you an image of another painting of forsythia, and maybe you can just suggest it to the client, because I think that it just looks really nice paired up. And so he said, okay. I said, if you feel comfortable doing it. So he said, okay, sure, I'll pass it along, whatever. So this was in response to that. I'm so sorry. Gap.
So only one flower meant more to her and to us. Sure enough, it was, and still is, forsythia. She waited for January every winter to trim the forsythia bush. In came the branches, snow-covered, to blossom in our living room by February. Our friends and family recall Mary's signature bouquet of bright yellow blossoms in February. They blossom outside in May. My mother was so passionate about forsythia, it seemed uncanny they blossomed on her birthday, also Mother's Day, May 14th. But it was at her funeral that forsythia left us all astounded. She fell breaking her hip in January. Her chances of surviving the operation were not high. My aunts asked me what they could do to help. I paused, not knowing at first, then said, it's time to cut the forsythia. It was January after all. We all cut forsythia. Everyone who knew my mom had forsythia in their gardens modeled after her. I got the phone call at 4 a.m. one cold morning early in February. The day had come. My mother had passed. By 7 a.m., my toddler was up and very curious. Why was I crying? Her dad gently shared the news. Granny had died. She promptly went out to the sunroom where the first yellow blossom had opened that very morning. One only. Thanks, Sue. One bright blossom. Don't worry, Mummy. Granny's here, she said, pointing with her tiny index finger to the one solitary blossom. By Monday, we had a full bouquet for the funeral, and so did everyone else. The minister commented, where did you find so much forsythia at this time of year, and how did you get it to blossom right on the very day? So that's my calling, to consider both paintings. Had to share the stories first.
Thank you, Ellie.
Great story.
So, as you can imagine, that really touched me in terms of just reaffirming why I do what I do.
Did you paint the forsythia already or after that?
I painted it before. I hadn't even thought I was going to bring it to the show, but when I got the notice that she was interested in the ilex, I just thought it would look better with the forsythia. My husband said, well, what made you send it to him? I said, I don't know, I just thought it was a good idea. So that was where anyway, it was lovely in touching on the community as well. My friend had made this connection, he's just kind of inadvertently ended up in this role of a real matchmaker. So anyway, so she bought the paintings, and I haven't met her, but I did put some greeting cards for her, because I'd already printed up those cards with the ilex on them. So I really did want to make sure to leave time for questions, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there, and if I was hoping that people would have something as a takeaway from this, and so I hope that you do, and if it's whether it's inspiration or just the reminder to notice your art and the connections that you have with people, and honor what your own role is in the community, and honor your own creativity in whichever form it takes. Thank you.
I want to make a comment. Thank
Sure.
you for coming and sharing both about your own experience and also the story. And I want to say there are a few mothers and daughters in the room today, so that doesn't always happen. That's pretty amazing.
Right.
You shared that story because there's a few pairs. And that's kind of family community, I think, brings that together once in a while. So that's really nice.
That's great. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask about the windmills.
Sure.
And so I was looking at them and I was thinking that you talked about the abstract and I can see the colors in them. By the way, I have no technical skill in art. Okay. Just preface that. But I was just wondering, like, did you do a whole series of them? Do you have just a couple? Is it sort of?
With the windmills?
Yeah, because I find them beautiful.
Oh,
and
thank
really
you.
Interesting.
I've done a lot now, and actually one thing I did want to touch on with that particular style or series and the connections is that's the one that the reason I keep going back to the windmills is people ask for them. I mean, I get emails out of the blue because people have seen them, and so I've just continued doing them, and I still have a number of them. And actually I'm supposed to be doing a show at the Glass Studio of windmills in the spring. But yeah, people buy them for their students their children who are graduating. I have that happen a lot. Well, now it's the landscape, it's what anyone who comes to Queens now, of course, that's what they know. They don't know that they didn't used to be there. So, and people, and so many people have the view, which just isn't rocket science, but you can see them the whole length of from Bath to whatever, Gananoque practically, like people that live on the river, people that live in the high rises, everyone seems to have not everyone, a lot of people, many people that I've had that purchase them have that as their view, so yeah.
Well, there's lots of different textures, so you get different feelings from the different ones too, so it's kind of like some people love them, some people aren't happy about certain aspects.
Yeah.
So I just think the abstract with it is really, it's informing. That's what I was gonna say, art also informs.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
A response.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, not everyone was happy about the wind farm, for sure. I've been pleasantly surprised at the number of people that have been, it has not been a terribly controversial.
I was going to ask you that, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a conversation piece, but I find even people from Wolf Island, I mean, I'm sure there are people who are still opposed to it, and of course, I mean, I have family and stuff up in Collingwood, but I can't show them there yet. It's still not in the comfort zone, but.
I noticed this is called sprig, not ilex.
Oh,
Is there a reason for that?
I feel like maybe I made the card before I actually titled I probably didn't know what it was called yet. So I painted it last year, and then I made the holiday cards, and then I would have asked Leanne what they were called.
Nothing.
I'm an artist,
Nothing
okay?
deep there, yeah. Not floristry.
Susanne, you say you have a little ritual before you begin.
Mhm.
Can you share that, or?
Sure. I like to tidy up a little. Not at the end, but at the beginning. I light candles. I put on music. I usually get all bundled up, and then the second I start painting, I get warm.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Sometimes I pick angel cards. Do you know what those are?
No.
They're these little cards. Oh my gosh, my mother, she's gonna have to watch the video. I got them from my mother, and they have words on them, a little angel and an image for the angel, and then a word like inspiration or trust or obedience, some that are a little more daunting, but pick a card and meditate on a question or something. Yeah, they're wonderful.
So you've done so many colors with the windmills over time, like you've done so many blues and then you've done greens and you've done reds and pinks. Do you go down and take pictures and do it from photos, or do you notice the sky or the color of the water? How do you come up with the combinations of colors? Because one day not too long ago I was driving down Johnson turning to Ontario early in the morning, and the sky was exactly like one of your paintings. Like it was so with the wind and it was like, and so I wondered, how do you actually capture all the different you know, variations?
Right.
Or how have you?
It's a very good question. I mean, I try to capture it quickly. Like, I try not to make them too labored. I try to do the skies all at once and just whatever comes out of it. I started out doing them very much like not looking at pictures at all. I would look at pictures for the angles of the windmills and stuff, but not for the sky. And then more and more I started feeling like if I got a good picture, then I could really capture the feeling better. If I, why couldn't I copy that the way I copy a fruit or something? It doesn't seem to work that way for me. I don't know, it's funny, when I look at the thumbnails on my portfolio on my computer, I feel like they all look the same. So it amazes me that you could actually see and feel that they look different. Like, I don't know if that really answers your question very well, but I do take pictures, and I take them, I just go out into the middle of my street and look down. It's a terrible picture, but it'll sort of be like, oh wow, they're really white against blue right now. Like they change a lot. So sometimes it's just a combination of a feeling. Sometimes I'm just saying, I know I'm going to do white windmills, so I'm going to make the bottom dark so it'll contrast and the top light, and the sky does both things. Or sometimes I'm really looking at a picture trying to get it. And the skies in October and November are unbelievable. It's a good time of year for the, yeah. Pardon me?
The lights at a good angle.
Yeah. And it's just striking sometimes.
Regarding the different styles, I find that it's a problem for me as well, for my work. Because people always, when they meet you, they always say, well, what do you do? And then you can't explain it. And
You work in a bunch of different media?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to, like you said, galleries too, they want to see one field of work,
Oh, really?
So
Huh?
when you do different things, it's problematic. And to me, it still happens. It just happens that way. I can't really stop it. And I just had a solo show, and it ended up being all these different things. And although they all looked nice together, but it still left people with questions.
Wow, look at all
so
of the amazing artists that have different, all the musicians who are painters as well, and there's so many people that if you're creative,
yeah.
sometimes you just can't bottle it up.
But when you talked about that piece over there, the abstract, it seems to me that I find that wherever I go, they see abstract as contemporary. And so this is what they kind of want to relate to as a value, because the other things may be construed as being outdated or not as stylish. And I don't know if you found that, but like you can do a wonderful still life, but then it's the abstract that has that impact. So how do you break through that?
I mean, I feel in a way I feel like any of the styles that I'm doing, I feel like they're contemporary because, well, whether it's being the choice of the black background
Exactly.
or the, the more abstracted interpretation of the landscapes. But I know what you mean, and I really just don't have a lot of experience with the art world and galleries, but I think it's maybe a matter of not paying it too much mind.
Yeah, and I also feel, now that I reflect back, I feel that maybe the audience needs to be more educated
Yeah.
too.
That's a good point.
You know, so because I don't know if they really looked closely enough to find the contemporary part in the stuff that isn't abstract.
Right.
Because there are contemporary things in it,
Right.
you know, but if it doesn't
That's a very
look
good
like
point.
boom crazy, then, well, maybe it's, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of educating the public more.
Did you go to the Portrait Prize exhibit?
No. And
It's
I
just-
live in a, I live in an out of the way location.
I just ask because it's there's a lot of realism in it. I mean, I don't know a ton about it, but that could be seen as outdated too. But I think there's still value placed on different. I mean, hopefully still value
Yeah.
placed on
So I
different
guess
styles.
it depends on who's looking
Yeah.
at the work. Yes, Lisa.
Suzanne, I had a question, if you don't mind talking about the design stuff that you did as well.
Oh yeah, sure.
I'm just wondering if that process of designing clothes gave you as much in terms of your creative, like satisfying you creatively as,
Right.
as this artwork that you're doing now, and how might it have differed, or?
Right. Yeah, very interesting question. I mean, in a way it did, but it was much more, well, I wouldn't necessarily say it was more challenging to make a living, but because we had a retail store and, you know, they're both challenging, but we had a retail store and we were manufacturing and there's a lot of margin for error, so there tended to be a lot of things that thwarted the creativity a little bit. Like, I feel like I'd be better at designing clothes now than I was then because of the pressures of the, you know, the marketplace and just the feasibility of things. And but at the time, I mean, I certainly think I felt satisfied because I just feel like I have a need to, you know, if I weren't creating anything, I'd find something to make, you know, I'd build something or cook something or whatever, decorate a cake, like I know that I sort of have that within me. But it was creative in so many ways, like we did a lot of special events, we had a really strong community through that, you know, really passionate customers and stuff like that. So, you know, it was creative on a lot of just different levels. Yeah, so just very different, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you.
You still might make your own clothes?
Well, no would be the short answer, although this, I thought I'd get out my best artsy outfit.
Yes.
This is an image of one of my paintings,
Oh.
and my sister-in-law had a clothing company for a little while where she was putting artwork on clothing, and so we came up with this together last year for a family trip that we all got these. So, you know, everyone was kind of wearing them as house coats, but it's also kind of a little bit of kimono. So, but I didn't sew it.
But you could.
Well, my sewing wasn't my forte. When we started out, we were doing straight lines. It was hemming, like it was a skirt that had no
Yeah.
zippers or buttons.
And that's
Very
surging
creative.
too, right? That's
Yeah, this is
surging.
surged, yeah, so surging's pretty easy.
Any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to say,
Sure.
I appreciated your saying, revealing that you feel maybe you haven't contributed enough to the world at one point, because having passed 70, I feel this very strongly, and it's nice to hear somebody else saying that. I think it's something we all have to live with, that we contributed something. I feel that you have.
Oh,
Still not
thank
sure
you.
that I have,
I'm
but you
sure.
have, yes.
Thank you. You know, it makes me think, and Ellie and I were talking about this the other night, just, we were talking about TED Talks, and
Yes.
I listened last night to Norman Lear,
Oh, yes.
And his is really good. It was not a talk, it was an interview, but
Yes.
a TEDx or something like that. But if
Yeah.
you look that one up, and I think the subtitle is, you know, living a life with meaning or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's, I'd tell that story, but I'd cry too.
I'm crying.
Was that the guy from Africa?
He was the guy that produced and wrote all the, like, All in the Family and all the famous
okay,
TV
different
shows.
guy.
And,
Sitcoms, yes.
yeah, and a bunch of movies. It was great.
Like, doing art is such a balance to activity out there. You know, you're challenging me to get back to it.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here and participating. It's great.
Wonderful,
It was-
thank you.
Well, I do agree with